All righty. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is Project Kids Summer Camp number 2. And the group is sort of with us, and we're going to have our workshop in a little while, but we're going to do an hour here with Michael and I sort of checking in and sort of reporting in on the homework assignment from last time, which is about tracking synchronicities, instances of synchronicity, manifestation, telepathy, symbolism, things like that. Mike, it feels like it's been kind of a long time since we talked. How are you?
I'm doing well. I don't think you've ever called me Mike before. I judge my interaction with people by the name they call me, and I'm a little bit of a trickster. I don't do this purposefully. I'll always introduce myself as Mike, but I do prefer to be called Michael. I'm not going to lie.
I I always want to call you Michael, and then you say Mike, and I'm like, okay, well maybe I should call him. No, okay, good. I'm sticking with Michael.
I guess it's all part of like the like fun little and I mean this in the best way, like the mind games. That's what this is. We're playing games with mind, with consciousness. Like naming is so important. So that's there's nothing any deeper than that. Like I don't know why I don't call myself Michael, but that was the first time you called me Mike. I'm doing well. I'm very excited to be here. A lot has happened since we've last spoken. Let's jump right on in.
So I think of Mike, I like calling you Michael because I think of Mike as like somebody I'd meet in like a college football bar, right? He was drinking a sort of Bud Light and, watching the score and whatever. And I just don't see you that way. I know that like, to the extent that you're interested in sports, it's for the same reason that I am, to sort of track what else is really going on there. Right.
So a little bit into my personal background. So I mean, I'm what, 50. So I was in college between the ages of the years 90.
You are 90. The youngest 50 I have ever seen. Pretty good, Michael.
And so like I went to a school in the South. I went to a small little school in the South, and like at least in the time, I don't know if it still is, but like fraternity life was a big deal in the school I went to. So I was in a fraternity. And so I was like in the jock fraternity, which I think is funny because like every once in a while, like I'll like fortunately, I don't know, like I'm still not in that circle. I know a lot of the people I knew back then still are really well connected in their lives. And my life has just taken such a drastic change in trajectory as I once was on. But I like to laugh at that in terms of like when we put each other in boxes. Like, I mean, it's just natural. We put people in boxes as a way to just understand things quickly. So like, yeah, like I'm like the jock frat dude, but they called me, and this is what I was, I was known by a nickname. No one ever called me Mike or Michael then. I was known simply as Magic.
Oh, so they are
like Magic Wand, but like but nicknames stick because like if a nickname does stick, it's because it's indicative of it working on a deeper level. Like when someone's got a really good nickname, it's because it's got like a double or triple entendre to it. So I always like that. And I like to again play with like the what we're going to call the magic realm.
Yeah, we were talking about this last night at Conspiracy Cocktail, and like terms of like nicknames that often like you might have for your friends, but also that like how like breakdancers and poppers always have like their dancing name, right?
Sure.
Oftentimes it's like the name of like an animal or a god or a character from mythology or something like that. And a lot of times they get these names when they're too young to even really understand what it means. But over the course of their dancing career, everything about their dancing starts to embody sort of that, energy and the look of that, to the point where the dancer actually looks like the animal that there is their nickname, even though they may not have when they first started, right? So yeah, absolutely. The name.
Do you have a nickname then? Like, are you leading us somewhere?
I don't have a nickname for something like that, but some of my favorite, poppers over the years have had nicknames like that, right? And usually you kind of develop your name when you're young, right? Your nickname. I don't really have one. I've never.
You didn't have a nick. Did you have a nickname growing up?
Just no. I mean, I had a gymnastics coach that like would say Auntie M, like Wizard of Oz, which I was like, oh, she was probably a handler for the Wizard of Oz programming or whatever, right? So she'd call me Auntie M. She was from New Zealand. And then no, not really, just M. I mean, nothing really super interesting that I can think of, but.
Up until the age of 5, and I don't remember this, I just know this from like, people in my family who tell me history, this is when we get into this sort of like, I don't have any recollection of this, but apparently I was known 100% to all my family or whatever up for the first 5 years of my life as keifer. I don't know why, that's not part of my name, but Keifer, like
Huh.
Kiefer Sutherland. And then all of a sudden, like they said at some age, like I put my foot down as a child and I said, like, I no longer want to be Kiefer, I guess. And the reason I'm bringing this up, obviously we're just kind of like riffing off of nicknames, but I've thought about that. And I think now is like a really interesting time right now. And particularly within the group that we're participating with, is we're dealing with changes in timelines or in dimensions or frequencies, whatever word you want to use, like shit's changing. And something happened to me, obviously, as a child where I recognize I'm no longer what I was before. And I need to change that by name. And so I think the naming and like how we change our names also, like I know some people I have a friend who just recently said, I don't want to be called what you call me anymore. I want you to call me this other thing. And I still call him his old name. But I think these name changes are milestone markers, particularly when they're significant as to changes in reality or changes at least into our personal reality.
Yeah, absolutely. The kefir thing is interesting. When I was little, I loved the drink kefir, like that, fermented yogurt drink.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
Loved that. Like that was like a treat for me. There was like this health food market that had it, and I always wanted to. I had no interest in the rest of the stuff in the health food market when I was little, but I always wanted that kefir drink, right? So that is an unusual name for a kid unless they liked that drink or something. I'm trying to understand where that would even come from.
You know what? I never thought of it that way. And like all children, like I like yogurt. So maybe that was it.
Maybe you liked it when you were little. No, but what you're saying about the nicknames is interesting. And it's also making me think about how much of that we're witnessing right now with like the quote unquote, like non-binary transgender stuff or whatever. We're like a huge part of like a huge signifying part of that transition is when they change their name, right? Like you very rarely see somebody go from being like William to Wilhelmina, right? They don't just make it the feminine version of their name. They change it into a completely different name or a completely different person. I am no longer this person. I am now this person, right? And so gender in this period of time that we're talking about has become mixed in with that. But I think that what you're talking about, because where kids are doing this in that sort of junior high school to late high, somewhere between late junior high to late high school, where they're wanting a different identity than the one that they've been assigned, and now gender has become mixed in with that. But it's a similar kind of thing. And then also, like, there's something I want to share here right now, but I don't know if it's okay to share it or not. Somebody very close to you explained to me the story of their name change this week, and I thought it was very interesting that name change drew you, right? Like it's crazy. It's a crazy. So I don't know if it's okay to talk about it. So I'll let you talk about it if you want to. But sometimes when you shift a name, it's because you're wanting to call something in, or you're wanting to bring an experience towards you, and you need to identify yourself in a certain way so that the experience of the person can find you.
I definitely see that. And I think that's one of the points of why I was bringing up the thing with the kefir, because where I think it gets really interesting is
there's just something really great in the chat room here, right? Steve Mercer said kefir could have been another way of saying
keyboard.
Good job, Steve. I like that.
So we've got, I don't want to like waste all of our time with this conversation. What's going to go somewhere, because there's some weird stuff I want to get into, and I know there's some weird stuff you want to share about this past month or so. But when the names change for I'm laughing because they called me Magic because it was Magic Wand, and I always like that one. So key for Magic.
Like a magic wand? Like a magic wand instead
double
of
entendre. It could go either way.
Yeah.
It could go either way. But when the names change, like for like you think it had for one reason, like the conscious reason, but like the deeper reason is always, the more interesting sort of stuff, that secondary wave, like not the primary wave that all of our focus on, but the wave behind the wave, the biogeometry, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So we can look at it. Names are great. And like what you're saying also with gender, I think that's a whole topic we're not even going to, I don't want to dive into now because that could take a whole lot of time. But what it is true about is the nature of identity being fluid now. And I think so much is changing that there is that fluidity between whatever reality is, like it's shifting. And the more fluid we are with it in our understanding, with our naming, like naming is just a way which we are locking down into a particular frequency or way of consciousness that, you know, as we begin to become more aware of the rules of the game, and more aware of it, like, you know, within our own lives and how we connect to other people, particularly in a group like this, you know, it goes from like just being nebulous, but to becoming like a skill set, a compass, a navigational map for working through what is coming up. Because, you know, as it appears that they're locking some stuff down, it's because other things are opening up. And this is how we get to it.
Okay, so I agree with you. I don't want to go into the gender thing because that could be a whole topic, but I'm just going to tease out something that maybe should be a topic of a future conversation with you.
Okay.
Jeff, who I don't think is here today, he was telling me about some video he watched where he was talking about these people who are like some of these time trials. So Robert Phoenix and I were looking at Susan B. Anthony and how she looked like a man, and he was saying, oh, what you guys were talking about reminded me of some video he watched where some of these quote unquote time traveler figures that are showing up in our, you know, in history kind of stuff, sometimes they go in a different gender. They switch genders when they time travel so that they don't, apparently like the switching of genders helps them to not mess up the timeline. Like when they time travel in their same gender, like it does something that messes one of the timelines up or whatever. So what you were just talking about and what we're talking about here with all these things being kind of tied into it together, it could be an interesting avenue to explore about the various reasons why a person might switch gender other than the ones that they quote unquote tell us, right? As a reason why.
Yeah. And, you know, as you're saying that, all I can think of is like Bill and Melinda Gates, right?
Right.
You know, just the whole nature of like, the Gates connection to the Rockefeller Foundation back in the 1800s, and Frederick Gates being the inventor, the whole thing, like, and like this role reversal, which is seemingly happening between those two. So like, yeah. Like,
and like how Melinda Gates is like a combination of Mrs. Doubtfire and Kevin Kline.
I've not seen that, but I can picture that. Like, you know, like undoubtedly she, like, I could see that nose. Like, that's definitely
right?
Mrs. Doubtfire nose.
All right, so let's kind of move over into what we're going to talk about today, which I know you had some experiences that you kind of wanted to share, as did I. We were kind of talking a little bit about this morning, but the like assignment for the group and what we were kind of focusing on was like paying attention to unusual synchronicities, right? Or to instances of telepathy or manifestation and whatnot. And then you and I got into this conversation this morning where we were talking about Tartaria, but then we also were able to like tie sort of I just lost my train of thought. I just had something I was going to say that was kind of fascinating about the Tartarian thing, and I can't even remember what it was. But we were talking about synchronicity and oddities and whatnot. And so do we want to start with sort of your little adventure or my little adventure, or do we want to move right into...
There are two like really big synchronicity stories which I want to share, and like, you know, so let me just go and give like where I came from for the last couple of days and just like give that as a background. There's some synchronicity there, and then I'm gonna pass it on to you. And if there's time, I'd like to go a little bit deeper because this one, the second one, is really friggin' weird.
All right,
and we can go from there.
All
right. So can you give me screen sharing capability?
Yes, I can. All righty.
All right.
Go ahead.
So Jenny and I, we just came back from a trip, a camping trip. That's why I didn't shower for 3 days. It was a 3-day camping trip. Let me see. Where is, I think this is it. There we go. All right, that's not what I'm looking for. Let me go to right here. So we went camping, and we made this trip, I don't know, a while ago. It's in this area. This is Maryland, where you see that red, pin is. And we drove through this area when we were returning from Tennessee, and this was back in early July, and it looked like a really cool place. We're like, hey, it's not too far from where we live right here, so let's go camping there. So we're like, all right, we're going to go, and we booked something for this weekend, and that was just, nothing more than this was an available weekend. And this is where we're going to go. So where we went was this place called Owens Creek, and we're in this place called Catoctin. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, mountains. And these are some pictures of kind of like what it looks like.
Catoctin.
That sounds about right. Words aren't my thing. So we go there, and if you see right here, what this is Camp David. So if you're familiar with anything with like, presidential retreats, if you're familiar with like, Middle East peace treaties, this is where it all happens. Camp David. This is the presidential retreat center from where they would go. And from, if this is Washington, D.C., where's Washington, D.C.? I'll give you a little point of reference. Here's Washington, D.C., so they would take the little trip right there. Here's Frederick, Maryland, which is about 12 miles to the south, which is where you get Fort Detrick. And then to the north, there's a whole bunch of other interesting things. Right here there's a national shrine to Our Lady of Lourdes. If you're familiar with that story, where there was like a sighting of the Virgin Mary in Paris. For whatever reason, this is where the national shrine is in North America. But anyway, so we booked this spot right here. Here it is. I'll go drill in a little bit more so. And it's beautiful. And it was like this fantastic camping trip. And we realized we're literally 1 mile away. If you go and you look at this is 1 mile away from here to, sometimes don't want to do that. It's 1 mile from Camp David. And then we go, we're there with Jenny's 2 little girls. We're having a great time. And we had to go, the weather was much colder than we anticipated. And we're a little bit underdressed. It was down into the 30s. We weren't expecting it to be that cool. So the closest place where we could go was, there's like a Goodwill here in this Thurmont city. So we're like, all right, it's only like less than 10 miles away from here. And we'll just drive through, and we'll go and pick up like a sweatshirt or something, to like another layer of clothing. But for however these reasons happen, the GPS machine, I try never to use GPS, but for whatever reason, we use GPS, and it takes us on this really roundabout way to get to this place. It should have been a 10-minute drive and end up being 25 minutes. And the entire time that we're there, I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, why are we being taken on this like roundabout way to this Goodwill shop? And then as soon as we arrive, we pass this. This is the road we came in. We came in on 550, and this is where we ended up going, right here, about a mile away. And we passed Camp Airy. And if you can recall in our earlier shows, remember, this was all planned months ago, before you and I ever had any of these conversations. This is literally the camp where I was going as a child. Yeah. And so last night, I was like, holy crackers, I'm driving right by this. We're hitting all this sort of stuff. I could hear around 2 or 3 in the morning, we could hear the Camp David is being visited by helicopters, because they're very, very loud. These helicopters, they're not just like normal, like helicopters flying overhead. They had to have been landing. So there's activity going on Camp David. That we drive by here. I'm not really certain anything deeper than that, other than the fact that I did have interesting dreams which would correlate to this point in my life. I was like, why am I brought back to this time in my life, into the same wooded area, the same forest? This is the same living forest. And so I kind of asked to my consciousness, my deeper consciousness, like give me some clues as to what that may be about. And last night I had some very, very unusual dreams, particularly for the age I would have been when I went to this camp. But I'm not quite at the point to come to anything deeper than that right now.
So so what I'm thinking as you're telling me this is like you drove by your camp, right? And this goes to our conversation this morning. Michael and I had a conversation this morning about the Schumann resonance and what can happen when your body becomes directly like matches the Schumann resonance or any other frequency possibly for that matter, right? And there's this ability to stop time with that. And so we were talking about some of these summer camps and some of these places, these various, even maybe a place like Camp David, there's a particular frequency there. And when your body matches up to it, you're sort of gaining admittance into that sort of space or whatever, right? Well, maybe by you driving by that, it brought your body into a frequency so that then you could go back and you were doing it in your dreams and they don't make, you had bizarre dreams. Maybe they were some form of memory, right? Especially now that you say that it doesn't make sense for the age that you were, right? But if no time exists when you're in harmony with that frequency, then, you know, like it's weird. Like when I think of some of the memories or spaces or things that I associate with this kind of stuff, I always am kind of look the same. I don't ever really look too much like a little girl or much like an adult. There's like a place where it seems to be like my permanent look forever, right? Kind of thing. Like I always look the same, right? And so you wouldn't identify it as being like a little kid or whatever, right? So maybe just by going there, it brought your body back into resonance with that space outside of time that is the purpose of drawing children to that place anyway at that time. I mean, not all the kids that go to the camps have these experiences, but they know that camps may be generators of figuring out who can do this, right? Who can sort of resonate with this thing and whatnot. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind when you say about going back and then people tapping into those dreams. When you went by that camp, your frequency may have gone back into sync with whatever's going on there. And that makes sense. I mean, there's Camp David too. And we were talking about that in terms of like the crossover between admittance to some of these bases based on security clearance versus admittance based on being able to resonate at that frequency or vibration and move through into a space that, you know, is off limits to everybody else per se.
Well, when we talked about this earlier, this is what really like seemingly making like initially jumped out to me when we're talking about like underground and particularly being able to step out of time and underground bases, Tataria, all the different sort of things. This area, particularly Camp David, this whole part of Pennsylvania, like right here, really beginning, let me see if I can find this. Where's Carlisle, PA? Carlisle, PA is right around.
Yeah. No, right near Newville and Harrisburg, Camp Hill.
Yes, there's Carlisle. Here's where Fort Detrick is, where they like, you know, all of the bio weaponry. If you know, like, if you've done any of that, like research, this is where all that's done. It's where the presidents go. This is where the Greenbrier is. This is all continuity of government. Carlisle is where the U.S. Army War College is, like the Harvard for like getting your PhD in military training. And so these are all historical underground facilities, whether it's the stuff that was made by like the big drilling machines or the stuff which has been around, like particularly like what you've talked about in the past with like the Manson tunnels and all of that. Like there's something there which is a resonator, and it pulls us in, particularly those of us that have had like actual experiences. Like I think if you're walking on the earth, and particularly if you're in this group or if you're watching these videos, like you're somehow connected. Otherwise, you would not be like brought into this. And we're beginning to understand them more and more. In my dream world, I was my son and my son's teacher were in play. And my oldest son and I have like a lot of physical resonance, and particularly as I brought up like in the beginning, like my keifer days. They used to call me keifer deefer. Like, you know, there's that. And so like you're right. Like, you know, there's this tapping into this time and space, which we can do consciously, but then physically where the time is not a limiting factor, where it's not this three-dimensional timeline as much as, like, you know, it's the time circle, as Dawn was talking about the last time we met.
Okay. So lots of things there. That's pretty interesting, like sort of the resonance with your son. You just said they called you Keifer. Bring that back up. Bring that back. Bring that back.
All right.
You said they called you Keifer Deefer, and I'm deciphering that as the key for D, like John D, right? Because you talk about John D in some of your stuff that you're doing. First of all, don't change anything here. But when you first came onto this, when you were over on the left side, something came up that said Foxville, Deerfield. Right? When you had your I don't know.
Yeah, that's the address of the camp. Foxville. Foxville Deerfield Road is the name of the road, which the camp, where is it? Which Owens Creek was the name of the campsite was on. Yes.
Okay, so that's just interesting, because last time we were looking at a fox trap, right? But we were looking at a fox trap last time we did a show together. You had Foxville, Deerfield. That's a really weird several. Okay, so now go back to the other. So I just was pointing that out because we've been the fox thing has come up a couple of times, right? There's also an area in Florida that I was drawn to several times as a late teenager named Deerfield Beach, right? And someone that I was thinking about today anyway, because it occurred to me that some experiences I had with this person, maybe her father was some kind of handler for me. They lived on Deering Street. So here we are with the synchronicities, but back to where, okay, one of the things that's weird in this map you're showing me, and this goes to what we talked about last time, is how many words on this map are things that have words in it that are things that I've talked about with somebody in some way, certainly over the last week, but even in the last 24 hours, right? Like, it's kind of weird when you look at all this stuff, and like there's all these places that are like towns out of people's names, right? It's just kind of interesting to look at that. Like, I'm starting to look at maps as like a completely different thing than just like a spatial marker kind of place. So I just wanted to say that, like, when you guys start digging into your own set of stuff, really pay attention. There's a fucking Mercersville. Look, Steve Mercer is right here. There's a Mercersville, right? There's like a, there's Mogginsville, like Randy Moggins, right? Look at that. There's Mogginsville up there. I just talked to Randy the other day. I haven't talked to him in a couple of weeks, right? But this is a different view than I was looking at a few minutes ago. But there was a place called Seven Springs on the view. I had a few that we just a few weeks ago went away and we stayed at a hotel called the Seven Springs. Robert Phoenix was telling me I need to talk to someone named Wayne that is a sound healer. Here's Waynesboro, right? There, like, literally, I can find every name on here practically has been something that has come up for me. There's Tartown. We were talking about
exactly.
Tartaria, right? Like, just, I mean, this is like almost every thing on here. Like, this is a little different than the view I was originally looking at, so I'm a little disoriented. But these mean things. So when we're asking you guys to kind of like go and do what we're doing, pay attention to all this little stuff and don't feel married to the idea that the place on the map is just a physical location.
I also want to put a little context to this area, because like, if you're not like from Maryland and Pennsylvania, like, this is meaningless, but you probably are aware of this little town right here, because this is a big part of the history of the United States.
Yeah.
This is Gettysburg. Like, Gettysburg is a very, very significant point, particularly if you follow like any of like dark journalist sort of work. And he talks about Gettysburg being very important to like time travel and like the Einstein or not Einstein, the what's the president? Eisenhower farm. Like, this is all like, how far away is that? That's like probably about 30 miles tops.
Mm-hmm.
So like, this is the part of the world. This is where all of like this like underground sort of army sort of stuff. And this is like kind of in the middle of nowhere. Like, you know, other than this, like no one would, you wouldn't know about this if you're a regular person, you know, who like knows where like Washington, anything on the 95 corridor is. This would
Look
be
at
kind of
this.
hidden from you.
There's also a place over here called Detour. Detour. That's the name of the place, is Detour. Right? There's a place called Kemar, but up near where you were, there's a place called Ruserville. Like this is a ruse, right? Like
Right.
this is, I mean, this is kind of, when we're not recording a thing, I'm just going to start taking a look at all the little stuff around these places, Cavetown, Wolfsville. I mean, there's like, and this goes to some other stuff I've been looking into lately as well. We are misunderstanding things sometimes just because they're called a certain name. We assume that someone is talking about what we think they're talking about when they're really talking about something else that has the same name. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with naming yourself and naming things and whatnot, right? Okay, I could go down this path forever, but I don't know that I could do it clearly without thinking. So let's kind of move on to the next part.
Yeah, let's switch up.
Let's switch out. So let's go over to some of my little things real quick. So
Okay.
so people have already heard, I talked a little bit about my trip to New Kuyama with on the show I did with Danny Katz. But one of the things that I didn't go into is that this weird synchronicity that occurred and then just kind of got tied together this morning. So on the way to New Kuyama, we stopped at this place in Taft that I did talk about, and we went to this bar called Bank. Right, and it was a really weird old 100-year-old building, and the question was, is this a Tartaria building? But the guy who owns the place also owns a restaurant called the Asia Experience. Right?
I just want to cut you off in a second. Are you able to pull this up on a map and talk about it? Because I love the maps. I want to do what you just did to me.
Okay.
I want to flip
so let's do this. First of all, let's do the Bank Sports Lounge. Bank Sports Lounge. I'm going to pull up the building for you because I know you like the buildings. Let's see. Here it is. Okay, this is a great building here. So I'm going to pull this up and screen share this one. Here it is. All right, there we go. Screen share. This is the building here. See if I can get a bigger picture. There, that's the building right there. So it's like one of those old bank buildings with the big arched window, right? And it's in an area called, let's just go, Taft, California. Maps. All right, let's see. I'm not an expert at working the maps like you, so can you guys see this? All right, so I don't know how to zoom in. I'm not really great with this stuff, but this is Taft. All right, so we go into Taft, and the guy he bought this bank building and then didn't know what to do with it. So we was talking to his friend who owns another restaurant called the Asia Experience. So they decided to open a sports lounge at this bank building. But the other restaurant it was very clear, like I read it on the newspaper article in the hallway, they have the restaurants will have little articles that have been written about them in the hallway near the bathroom or something. So I read about this other restaurant he has called the Asia Experience. And then when somebody was trying to tell me about the owner, they also mentioned they had this Asian restaurant named Asia Experience. So that happened on the way to New Kuyama. Then we get to, but here's what's weird. On the way to Taft, we had the lady from the hotel we were going to stay at in New Kuyama called to know what time we were coming to check in. Her name was Asia. So then we have Asia, then we have the Asia Experience, and then when we get to Taft, Asia's doing everything, and to New Kuyama, Asia's doing everything. Asia's our bartender, Asia's our checking us in at the hotel, Asia brings us our food, Asia brings us whatever we need. So Asia is there to take care of us. Where there's nobody else there, Asia is taking care of us, right? So we eat dinner there the first night, and then the second night we decide we want to go to dinner somewhere else. And the closest restaurant of any interest is an hour and a half away. And the first one we're going to go to was closed. It was called Ember, which was an interesting name considering the fires. But we finally decided on this restaurant called SY Kitchen in Santa Ynez, California, right? Which is like near Solvang kind of thing. And I called to make a reservation, and the girl fucking answers the phone and says her name is Asia. Right? And then so we're in this Tartarian building in Taft. Laura's running around asking people if they know anything. One person, if they know anything about these buildings, if there's any Tartarian buildings. And then we end up in this Asia Experience. And if you really go look into, obviously, Tartaria, we think of it as this broad thing with all this information about Antiquitech and mud floods and stuff now. But the area that is known as Tartaria is basically, in Eurasia or Asia. but we're having this sort of tartar, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
What is
That
this?
building was right across from here, is what he was saying.
So this
So
is.
I want to go and add another layer to what to what you're sharing. Can I do that for a sec?
Yeah.
All right, so Taft. So I'm looking at it on your map, and I pull it out. Like, it's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. Currently it's a big prison town. Like, there's a big prison right in there.
Yeah.
Taft. It's named for it first got on the map because for oil, and it was where Standard Oil had their regional operations headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when we're looking at Standard Oil, we're talking Rockefeller. Right? We're talking about, like, there's certain names of individuals. There's certain, for whatever reason, not like getting into like no more deeper than that. I don't want to go down into 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati. Let's just talk about names. We know that the Rockefeller name is incredibly significant in terms of the shaping of our reality of at least the last 150 years. Mm-hmm. And so this part, this town, this location, this physical spot, which you're talking about, was very significant to their operation, whether that's and usually what I've discovered in a lot of this stuff is there's always a top story, there's always a main wave, and then there's the secondary wave. So we've got that.
Yeah.
So, but it's not just that. So that's the land itself. All land has a quality that's general, and then we add layers upon it. If you're familiar with technology, they call it the OSI stack. We build up upon it. And so one layer of reality above the land itself is we're coming into the reality of naming. So this is named after, you go look on Wikipedia, you see it's named after President Taft. I don't know my Taft very well. The one thing I do know about Taft is that Taft is a Skull and Bones member. He's on the illustrious list of presidents of the United States who've also been a member of the death cult, known as Skull and Bones, which seemingly they were on what separates the Skull and Bones group is that they deal a lot with assassinations. Mm-hmm. And they deal a lot with really understanding sacred space. So bringing this back to yours and my conversation, and particularly as it relates to the weirdness of reality and whatever's going on, there's something, I know that this land, which you're talking about, is charged on multiple levels, so that when your experience then taps into the Asia, taps into the hotel, the Tartaria with the bank, you automatically we're tying into the vaults, we're tying in the oil, we're going underground. So yeah, undoubtedly, we're whatever we seemingly, and when I say we, I'm saying everyone who's in this group, we're all connected, we're dealing with this. And what you and I are doing is we're just sharing our particular stories with a greater detail, just maybe to bring things to a surface. But I would say that was a spot. What exactly it's a spot to, that's what we're uncovering. Okay. But the markers are there. All the markers are there.
There was oil rigs in all the fields around. When you're leaving town, you see all the oil stuff. But look at just the names around here, right? So you have Ford City. So you've got oil, and then you've got Ford, right? So you have Rockefeller, oil, Ford, cars. So that's Ford City right above it. There's a place called Spellacy. That implies some interesting magic, right? That's look at this.
Okay.
That's a weird name. And then there's Mid-Oil here, and then there's Fellows. So you were just talking about Skull and Bones and secret societies, right? I think these,
the Odd Fellows.
The Odd Fellows.
That's the name of the the Masonic organization with fellows in the name. That was the first thing, and as soon as that was the first name that jumped out when I looked at your map, was the Fellows, definitely.
And you come into Taft from the intersection, because this is how we came in, of the Maricopa Highway, right? Maricopa leads to another prison. There's another prison down that way, but Maricopa is also another take on Mariposa, which is butterfly, right? Which is kind of interesting. Similar word kind of play for your word stuff. So yeah, so it was
And you come in on Route 33,
Route
and that
33.
like at Maricopa 166. So we've got a doubling. So we've got,
Yep.
and we see right at Arvin, we've got 223. You know,
And we've got
reverse
911 up there.
There's definitely number play in this spot.
911, right? 119 reverse 911 up there.
There you go.
All right. So anyway, so I don't know that we can do any more with that, but that was kind of an interesting synchronicity that I didn't even realize the value of it until this morning when we were talking.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. And I'm going to quickly tell you the next one, and then there's a more significant one. So everyone knows we've had fires here, right? A lot of fires. The first one that we noticed was on Labor Day. We went to the beach, and when we came back in the morning, this little area over near our house where we exercise, the running trails, was on fire. Like we noticed it went, day before Labor Day. So it was Sunday, not Monday. So it was on fire. So we come home and we get home. We're like, it fucking looks weird out, dude. Like everything looked like we were on a movie set. Like nothing looked normal. The sun, like it was a small fire. It was just in this one area, but the sun was already that crazy weird orange color and everything was glowing. And we're like, it's weird, right? So we come in, we get ready. We're going out to dinner. We talk to Jeff. Jeff says it's on fire where he is too, which is in Oregon, and that the sky looks really weird there too. We finish getting dressed, we get in the car, we're driving, we're a few miles away from the house, and I go, it's really weird that there seems to be these little fires everywhere, right? Because we were talking to Jeff, and I look up, and there's a fucking sign right there at the intersection for a new TV show called Little Fires Everywhere. Like literally.
Was this one Sunday or on Saturday?
Sunday. This is the day that it was 121 degrees here. And when we got back from dinner, our power was out, and our power was out for 36 hours after that. Right. But like literally, I just said to her, it's weird how there's fires everywhere. And I look up and there's this new show on Hulu called Little Fires Everywhere. And there's like a ton of famous people in it, like a ton. It's very interesting. Right. So that was just a little thing. I don't know that there's too much more to it than that, but I thought that was kind
I want to jump onto that because this is going to be really you're going to like this one.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So, I've been like on my YouTube channel, I've been chronicling like a bunch of synchronicities. And I started with this house. I think we talked about it here, like, which I cleared out. Turned out like it had the Steiner connection because the founder of the Waldorf school, which my children go to, it was their house.
Yeah.
So that happened. And within the central Pennsylvania area, there's like a Steiner group. I'm not a member of it. You know, that's not my thing. You know, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. It's just not my thing. But for whatever reason, I'm on the email distribution list. And so following all of this stuff, which was going on with like the house and like the Steiner, I see that they're having like an event on Labor Day weekend. And I was like, let's go. You know, me and Jenny were like, you know, we don't have anything to go, and there's like some other reasons, but we go there, or particularly with me and my mindset, like the reason why I want to go is I want to follow this golden path of synchronicity, the golden thread. So we're there on the Saturday night of Labor Day weekend. And it wasn't a private event. Like, you know, it's called Court of Michael is the name of the organization. And it's a Steiner group, and they have like, you know, they put out like an invitation. And so we go there to it, and it's this house. It was a house. It's on a 100-acre farm, originally deeded by like William Penn back in like the great Pennsylvania Holy Experiment, like all that sort of stuff. And there's a farmhouse that was built in the 1700s, and that's where like the meeting was. And after that was a potluck, and you know, it was an interesting time, and blah blah blah. We'd do the potluck. Then afterwards, they were having a bonfire. Okay, now we're gonna start getting interesting. So it's a big bonfire. So the sun goes down, and the guy whose house it was, he like put like a whole bunch of like, you know, cuttings down, probably like 25 feet high. So when it finally caught on, there's like flames shooting up like 40 feet. Like it's a legit bonfire. There may be like 15, 20 people there, and there's an open clearing. Like it wasn't like anything was going to get burnt down. There's plenty of space. And so I'm sitting in like a safe spot just watching because, you know, bonfires can be really like, you know, mesmerizing. And then all of a sudden I see like by the closer to the fire, like there seems to be something going on, like a panicky sort of situation. There are all these people up around it. And, you know, just kind of my nature is like, you know, I like to go where the action is. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go see what's going on. So I start walking towards it. And then I hear the worst sound you could ever hear. And you could hear all of these meows. The friggin' cats in the bonfire. And it's like horrible. Like they're not like, it's like they're panicky. They're not like burning yet, but you're like, you know, you hear this, like, you know, like any human being, like, you know, you've got an empathy towards animals, and particularly I like cats. You know, you can probably see a cat over my shoulder right now. So, so like the fires, everyone wants to go and save the cats. But I tried to get near, I couldn't get within like 15 feet of the bonfire. The heat was so friggin' intense. Like, and this other guy, like, you know, who's kind of like behind the scenes during the whole sort of event, he puts something over his face and he goes in and he saves the cats. He saves 3 kittens. Like they takes 3 kittens out and we go back to the house, and it was kind of like, it was a weird event. And so the kittens seemed to be fine, but, as we come back, like, you know, I knew in my mind, and this is the Saturday. So this is the Saturday night before the Sunday. I knew in my mind that I'm looking for synchronicity. I'm looking for something strange. And I'm like, this is unusual. This is unusual. I don't quite know what the unusualness is yet. I just know that, you know, I've been to a bunch of bonfires before, and I've never been around like screaming kittens. And that, like, you know, I had like a visceral reaction hearing the sound of the cats. And I remember thinking, like, I do not want to hear the sound of these cats burning alive. Like, you know, and we were actually talking about beforehand, like, you know, wicker men and like, you know, the whole sort of burning at the stake and that whole sort of stuff. So, all right. So I go and I make a video and I talk about this. And so now I'm going to share the screen a little bit. And so I get this email from this guy who listened to my presentation, and he goes to the actual like event. This was the event right here. This is all
right.
And he starts breaking the thing down, and I'm just like mesmerized. So the actual event, you can see it was called the Last Hurrah Summer, the Last Hurrah of Summer Tyranny Defied Festival.
Wow.
Like, you know, like not wearing masks and sticking it to Governor Wolf. Like this is Lebanon, PA, like where they really are like, you know, they don't want to follow the government sort of stuff. And like that was part of what this was all about. So the guy, he calls this, he's like, Bast Hoorah, a deified festival. And he writes in here, and I'll just go into it. He's like, I'm sure it's no coincidence and no way to suggest Korban Olah, which means burnt offering of the feline variety. It's like, oh, you escaped this burnt offering of the cats. And he talks about, this was in the original thing, which was sent out by, in this invitation. This was the farmhouse it was at. You could see there's this cat, which is they're trying to capture. And this goes back to colonial times. It's all about like, you know, fighting our oppressors. Right. And he ties it into all of this Egyptian mythology, or Egyptian, like, you know, going back to biogeometry and that sort of stuff, like hoorah, like, you know, and then specifically Bast, who is the Egyptian cat god, also known as Bastet, and how she's the fire goddess. And we're actually there. If you go and you look at her festivals, we are at the last day of the procession of Bast, which is a 7-day festival, and it's all about fire. So what were you just talking about? It's the same time. We're on the Saturday before your Sunday fire. And if you go and you look, I'm tied into Oregon. A year earlier, you could see I did this presentation here, and was talking about my trip from Marietta to Ashland, Oregon, where I talked all about this trip I had there, some presentations, and I showed the correlations. Yeah. So the very next morning on the 6th, because I was there on the I was there. Where is it? Right here. On the 6th was when I was there. And then on the 7th is when all of the fires in Oregon kicked up.
Yeah.
And so you had the fires at the same time as this
And I was
strange
talking to Jeff,
guy.
and I was talking to Jeff, who was in Oregon, right? Who used to live in Ashland. He lives a little away. Go back to when you were on the page that had the thing about Lebanon.
This or this?
That one. Okay, so first of all, like, Dirt is going with little weird synchronicities here. So it's called the thing with cord. Let me see that part there too, real fast.
Yes, right here.
Yeah. So the end of the corona, resumption of the Cord de Michael meetings, right? That is about you. And I was thinking like Michael's court, like Michael's going to hold court there. Like there was a reason you were drawn there, right? And so you have these kittens there. We're here. Things are on fire. The heat is 121 and there's no power. So worried about my old cat getting too hot, right? Like that was like a concern that my cat was going to be too hot, right? Because she's old and very frail and whatever. But
and the 3 people in this group have cats of the same name. I just want to add that. So we're connected by cat metaphors anyway.
Right. So the cats, the olive, Olivia, olive, maybe something with an olive tree, olive branch. But what's fucking weird is this thing about Lebanon County here, right? Okay, so I was born at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. And shortly after I moved to this neighborhood, the liquor store around the corner changed its name to Liquor Market Cedar Lebanon. And that same day that we saw, that was a couple of years ago, but the same day that we saw that Hulu fire, that thing with the little fires, we were talking about it when we were driving in that direction, about how weird it is that like, so everywhere I go, something about Cedars of Lebanon shows up and something about Scientology, because I was born at Cedars of Lebanon, which is now the Church of Scientology. And on one side of our neighborhood, there's a Scientology office. And on the other side, there's this liquor market, Cedars, Lebanon, right? I don't know what kind of trees are on this property, but I'm curious if there's any cedar trees on this property in Lebanon here, right? But make that thing bigger again. Oh, the sweetest Michaelites on Earth are meeting in person today, not virtually. You're definitely one of the sweetest Michaelites. There we go. So, but can you make that?
Hershey, Pennsylvania. If you're familiar with the chocolate company, this is their town. This is where Hershey's headquartered, where it all comes from.
Yeah, this is just this is so interesting. So we were all having some kind of fire ritual or trial by fire or something kind of thing going on there. It's interesting that was, but to this cat stuff, there's also, so somebody who's not here today in their assignment, they had something also about the Burning Man, the Wicker Man kind of thing as well, which I thought was kind of interesting. But you said something about the cat that I made a thought come to me, but I seem to have lost it now. My cat is hairless now, so she actually looks like one of those Egyptian cats. It's quite interesting. Yeah, and she's wanting to come in right now. So she's in. Oh, here she is. Hi, Olivia. Bastet will come forth soon to take control of the fires. That's interesting.
Right, exactly. That's why this was, I mean, I just found this on the internet. You know, I'm not really much into Egyptian, with the Egyptian mysteries. I know a little bit, I suppose, but you know, just how much this connected. And Bastet is always shown with kittens.
Kittens. Wow. Olivia is going crazy over here.
I'll show you one last thing because this is nuts. So let me see if I can find this.
All right, and then I'm going to take you to a nutser one, and then we're going to move to the group.
Okay, I'll let you go. Do me your nuts because I'm going to go find this thing which I need to find.
All right. So we're reading this book called Synchronicity as part of some of the research that we're doing here, and this is a book called Synchronicity, The Bridge Between Matter and Mind by F. David Peat, who also wrote a book called The Looking Glass Universe that sounds interesting that I might look into, right? So we're reading this book, and this was a couple weeks ago. I'm talking to Michael on a Sunday morning on text, and I send him a picture of the book saying, we're reading this book. It's kind of interesting, right? And it was the day after the fires. It was the Monday. It was the day after the day after all that stuff. Our power was still out, so we were sitting outside. So I'm reading this book, and I take a picture, and I send it to him. He's like, wow, that looks really interesting. And then I turn the book over, and I'm just looking at the back, and I notice that the back is talking about quantum theory and Jung's Scarab, right? Now, in the book, to the point we were at so far, there had been some talk of Jung, but hadn't really gotten into it. The book says Jung's Scarab. As I'm looking at that, right, I open the book, and I open the book to the page talking about Jung's Scarab, and a scarab comes out of the sky and lands on the book. So as we're talking about it, right? And so I send Michael the picture, and then Laura decides to look up Synchronicity in Jung's Scarab and pops up with some article about spooky synchronicities between Jung's Scarab and CIA and FBI operations.
Going more on that.
So I went and read the article. I have something that I'm going to read to a little passage from this book that I'm going to read too. But I went and started to read that article. It was a pretty long and boring article, and after reading like 10 or 12 pages of it, and it hadn't gotten to the good part yet, I moved on. But it started my mind thinking about like operations and intelligence and stuff like that, because that's what we're talking about here, right? And I started to think about like maybe when they do some of these, like, so we're talking about how there's like a special resonance at these areas where the summer camps are or whatever, right? Well, where some of these events take place, like they don't just take place at random places. They take place at federal buildings, they take places at schools, they take places at certain historical intersections. Like maybe there's something about the resonance there that tends itself towards synchronicity or coincidence or something being able to manifest. And so when they're doing, I've talked about on this show many times, I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation about a technique that I was made aware of that the intelligence agencies use called shadows and echoes. And it's where like they will set up, so like with the Boston bombing, this is how I learned about it, right? Like a few blocks away from each other, they have a completely controlled scenario, and then like a scenario where there's like a few controls in place, but not completely. And when they'll do their drill right away from a few blocks away from where an actual event is going on. And when they're covering this, they're showing you coverage from both events. They're showing you like the thing that's being totally controlled, and they're also showing you some coverage from the thing that is not totally controlled, and it gives it sort of like an organic look to it, right? And if you think back in the Boston bombing, there was like that weird stuff where like they said that Tamerlan Tsarnaev died when his brother hit him with a car. Remember that? But then there was also the video of him being arrested naked and put in the police car. So if he was already arrested and put in the police car, how did he end up run over by his brother, right? And if you look at them, they look like slightly different people, and all these pictures are from different angles. And so I read this like whole write-up on a board about how they use this technique of like setting up a drill space. Like apparently there was 2 boat shootout settings right within a few blocks of each other. One that was like this, the markup, the scenario, and one where something a little more natural happened, right? But I'm wondering if this area, which is Watertown, it was in Watertown, Massachusetts, is where like most of this happened. Like if that's a special significant area where it's prone to synchronicity, manifestation, coincidence. It's an area where you could pull something like this off because you can go there and start doing something, and it's almost like the people in the area will kind of like snap to that idea, right? So like if they're aware that there's places that are synchronous, right? Where things seem to sync up. You start doing something, or you throw an idea out there, or you start running 2 parallel things that like would normally seem like they'd be separate, but they'll begin to synchronize into one. And so it becomes confusing, right? And so I started thinking about that like synchronicity is actually a tool that the intelligence agencies use. And that's part of what makes this book so interesting, right? So I'm gonna read a little piece from this. I don't know if I did as good a job explaining that as it was when it was clear in my mind at first, but so the day that I sent you the piece about this, before I sent you these pictures before we started reading, but the part we were reading was actually a section called Synchronicity, right? And this book at this part is largely about Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Jung, a psychologist and a physicist who kind of came together and melded their ideas, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here with like taking the metaphysical and the physical and working them together in our emotional state. So I'm gonna read a little bit of this. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important. Okay, synchronicity. At first, there were only a few tantalizing hints as to Jung's thoughts on synchronicity. In 1929, while lecturing to a group of students, Jung said, "Synchronism is the prejudice of the East. Causality is the modern prejudice of the West." A year later, during a memorial address on the death of Richard Wilhelm, the noted student of Chinese thought, Jung expanded a little on his original remark. The science of the I Ching, indeed, is not based on the causality principle, but on a principle hitherto unnamed because not met with us, which I have tentatively called the synchronistic principle. During a lecture at London's Tavistock clinic 5 years later, Jung appears to have used the term synchronicity for the first time. Tao can be anything. I use another word to designate it, but it is poor enough. I call it synchronicity. So you have Carl Jung talking about synchronicity at Tavistock, right? Which has been, obviously like the group most charged with controlling our culture, and they do it through events, right? Okay, continuing. Now, thanks to Pauli, Jung was able to crystallize his ideas further, and in 1952, the two men published together The Interpretation and Nature of the Psyche, a book containing 2 essays, one by Pauli on the influence of archetypes in Kepler's theory of planetary motion, and the other by Jung on the nature of synchronicity. Although the latter essay bears only Jung's name, it is clear that it is the result of long discussions with Pauli. It is not so much a definitive explanation of synchronicity, but rather a starting point. Indeed, it forms the starting point of this present book. For as Jung writes in the introduction, "In writing this paper, I have, so to speak, made a good promise which for many years I lacked the courage to fulfill. The difficulties of the problem and its representation seemed to me too great. If I have now conquered my hesitation and at least come to grips with the theme, it is chiefly because my experiences of the phenomenon of synchronicity have multiplied themselves over the decades." Within the essay and certain of Jung's other writings, synchronicity is variously referred to as the coincidence in time of 2 or more causally unrelated events, which have the same or similar meaning. Creative acts or acausal parallelisms. Sounds kind of like this technique I was just describing on a certain level.
Right.
He also wrote, "Meaningful coincidences are unthinkable as pure chance. The more they multiply and the greater and more exact the correspondence is, they can no longer be regarded as pure chance, but for lack of a causal explanation, have to be thought of as meaningful arrangements." And then it just says here, "In the chapters that follow, we shall excavate the deeper meanings of these statements and claim and see how they reveal a universe that unfolds according to a hidden dynamic order." Jung also attempted to integrate his intuitions on synchronicity into the framework of modern physics. Just as he had suggested that the mind results from a dynamic equilibrium of dualities, so he produced a diagram showing how synchronicity balances causality in the dual patterns of nature. And then there's some graphs here. There's more stuff. It's a good, I'm not that far through it yet. The more I go, the more I'll have to say. But to carry on with the synchronicity from this book. So there's something, this technique is an intelligence. This technique of either using synchronicity to identify something or as a meaningful arrangement. I don't know. I don't understand how to arrange all the pieces. It's a thing. And then just today I thought, oh, I know, maybe I'm going to make a picture of this, my background, because I thought it's kind of a cool picture, right? So right before we start, I go and I pull up the F. David Peat book, Synchronicity, okay? Now I'm gonna screen share here. So I pull up, I'm going and I'm looking and I'm searching and I'm gonna pull this up, right? I'm trying to pull this up, right? But what I notice here is there's another book called Synchronicity, right here, I've been talking ad nauseum about this 4-lobe shape. You and I went into it at one point about sort of the wallpaper of the universe. This is another way of representing it. This is the inverse. When you do the 4 lobes, you get this in the middle. I did a show with Chad Stumpke the other day. We were talking about this in terms of sound, right? And it's the inverse of a Templar's cross also, but this book is also called Synchronicity. This is like the geometric shape that the atmosphere or the reality, I can't quite figure it out yet, but I'm bordering up on something and it's coming up all the time. So there is a book called Synchronicity that shows, that same thing. And then also there's a new edition of this same book that I'm reading right now called Synchronicity, The Marriage of Matter and Science, right? This is the next book. And it's got the scarab on the fucking cover.
Right.
And that's the exact same scarab that flew down on the book. I could share the picture with everybody. Literally, it is the exact same kind. There's multiple kinds of scarab. That is the exact scarab we're dealing with there, the one with the green. Okay, so like there's, the more that I'm like, the picture's on my phone. I can't get it onto there so quickly. I don't know if you have the picture too. But this shape here, like there's something about, like this is the shape I see everything made up of in my psychedelic state, right? I'm starting to identify musical artists that talk about that their music is about the same stuff that we talk about, that have this symbol as part of their things and what they're doing. We were doing Project Power last night at Conspiracy Cocktail, and we were talking about the various kinds of ecstasy pills, and I was able to identify that there was ecstasy pills with that symbol on it, right? That sound system that I told you about has that symbol as their thing. There's something to synchronicity and this shape, right? And the unfolding, like multiple realities, or unfolding, being able to move through from one timeline to another, or one space to another. I don't quite have it yet, but I'm bumping up. I'm starting to, everything's starting to kind of come together into the same area. So I'm hoping that by, you know, bringing this to you and bringing this to the group, that we can start to understand what this is about. But I mean, even look at this picture. It's like one reality inside of a box. Right? And then there's a separate thing that seems to have certain access points to it in here, which would be similar to what I've talked about in terms of this encased space we're in. And if you need to use this geometry to sort of come through a point and access the next space, right? So I don't even know what I'm talking about here, but
pause right there to see some of the things which are also in it. Keep talking though, but I'm looking at the screen as well.
Here's this is another version of the book that has the 4-lobe shape that I'm talking about, this 4 lobes, right? And this is the inverse of it, right? Like it's the inverse, and this is the negative space, right? And so I'm just rolling down to see, here's another book on synchronicity with a different, it's the same book, but it's different. But I mean, you know, there's all sorts of interesting things that pop up here.
What was that thing, Paperboy?
Where did you see that?
Down a little bit. It's a book cover. Paperboy. The bridge between.
Let's see. The bridge, it's, let's see if I can move it out here. I can't, let me see if I can click it and make that bigger. See what this is. No, it just shows the old same book. That's weird, right? I clicked on the one that says Paperboy and it shows me this. Let's go back. Let's go back for a second. All right, Paperboy. Yep, it does the same thing. That's weird, dude.
I normally have that many folders or tabs open as well. Okay. Paperboy is my father used to call me that, and I never understood why. We were talking about nicknames earlier.
Yeah.
Probably the Paperboy.
The Paperboy, look at this. This is an interesting looking book too. The World Futures, Journal of New Paradigm Research, Alchemical Transformation.
Huh.
Irvin Laszlo. This looks like some new agey kind of stuff in some ways, but look at some of these graphics here with, yeah. All right, so I don't know. Here's a book by David Bohm and David Peat. So this is the guy, Science, Order, and Creativity. Look at this one, this quantum implications here. Science of the Soul, Our Consciousness and the Structure of Reality. So these are just some, here's flickering reality. That's kind of interesting. I've been told I flicker in and out before. But I think these are just, I was going to say there's pathways to go down, and here's a book by also F. David Peat called Pathways of Chance. So I don't even know what I'm saying here, but I think you can kind of get the sort of where I'm leaning towards, what I'm tending towards here. That like the further you track these synchronicities, the interesting spaces it starts to open up, right?
And then the last thing on the lower left-hand corner, there's a picture of a clock under the Wikipedia. Is that Brackenhouse? Why are they showing that with synchronicity? That's there it is. Astral represents an example of synchronicity.
Represent for Jung an example of synchronicity, that is of a parallel non-causal relationship between the development of celestial phenomena and those marked by terrestrial time.
Yeah, okay. I think where does it say what the image is? Let me see more of the dial clock at Loggia Square in Lombardy, Italy. Okay. I thought that was Brackenhouse in the UK. Okay.
So, and then what it's talking, I mean, maybe some of the synchronicities have to do with like, the astrological clock being in certain areas on a certain day at a certain time will just wind up, we'll just wind up these strange activities. But like that technique of shadows and echoes seemed to be basically what Jung was laying out right there at Tavistock.
I would agree. And I would also say, when you mentioned like why Watertown, remember when we were talking about the Gaia Matrix, that book?
Yeah.
And so the whole nature behind, or the whole idea behind that book is this energetic harmonic between different parts of North America and how it spins out. And it has that exact location, like right around Boston, as being very significant in terms of, like, at least from this guy's thesis, which he puts forth, is like having harmonic effects. So if you go and you look at the Boston Marathon, like in terms of like an energetic, an event, and what happened, whether it was like, shelter in place in your home, or whether it's like the idea of what a marathon represents, like,
Right.
the long commitment, like there's definitely some interesting things in play. And then there were all the death skull, that's how like everyone was able to identify like who the players were, because they all had that same symbol on their shirts, like, which was basically a skull and bones. It was this Jolly Roger. It was the same play upon which we see over and over again. So
there's me with the Scarab.
I like the fact that that's coming into play, and that always seems to be like the nature of what we keep seeing is like there's this militaristic, very dominant oriented aspect to the play which is being put out in front of us, but there's also a revealing of the methods.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That stuff that happened there with the Punisher stuff, right? The skull and bones that you're talking about of Craft International. Like, what was so interesting about that is immediately after the Boston bombing, you had this strange situation where Jesse Ventura starts suing that guy from Craft International for saying that he had beaten Jesse Ventura up in a bar. And then the very next thing is that guy, his name's Kyle something or other, like he gets shot by a person he's taken to a gun range. So then you have a huge movie made about him being the best sniper ever in the military.
I didn't know that guy was that organization. I know the other part. I didn't know that was linked to that logo.
So Craft International was his company. So as soon as after the Boston bomb, when people start paying attention to that, right, where conspiracy theorists jump on that craft, that's this guy. Then all this weird stuff other stuff starts happening with Jesse Ventura, and then this weird thing where he takes a guy who's mentally unstable to a gun range.
Yeah, I remember that.
Him. And then they made a movie about, and you have all these articles being written about Kyle, whatever his name is, and like about how he was like the best sniper ever in the military, right? And my opinion is all of that was crafted to make sure that when people looked up Craft International, they didn't discover where they were at how they played into the Boston bombing, right? So they whenever anybody looks up Craft International, they'll get all this stuff about how Kyle whatever is a hero, or he has a feud with Jesse Ventura, just like you had the creation of BLM, Black Lives Matter, right after the Bundy Ranch, where the BLM went in and did all that crazy stuff. They didn't want people looking into the BLM, so now there's a new BLM that is like a controlled something else. Right? They love to do that shit too. So the Boston bombing, for all those things you just said, and then for this other thing, what I'm saying is some of these areas you can they have a vibration about them, and you can control an event there that spins out multiple things that now creates a whole new landscape of reality. And that's the way Tavistock tapped into this work on synchronicity, and they use it.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Right. So we're on to something with this. This is really important. They want this. They know about synchronicity, and they want all of us to just believe everything is a coincidence, that it doesn't have a meaningful arrangement, but it does. And there's something metaphysical about it. They don't actually control the whole thing from start to finish. Right. They know that there's a certain metaphysical thing going on, and they just put certain ingredients in the pot, and it just happens, right? And maybe it doesn't happen exactly the way they think it's going to, but it happens in a way that they can spin other things off of and work with. And so that's what I'm recommending that we begin to do, right? That we understand how these things work, and that we use them to understand our own realities and manifest the things that we want. So I think we should take the break real quick now. Do you have anything else you want to say before we end the public recording, Michael?
I'll show one last thing, and then I'll be done. This will take just a moment. Back to where am I going to find this? So I did this video. I did a video telling that Bastat story.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
I saw the video. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I did see it pop up in my feed. I meant to go back and watch it. Yeah.
So undoubtedly, I think that ties into this group, as we said before, because of like the cat connection between so many people, and then also the fire connection. So as I was telling that story, I told a couple different stories in that one video. I concluded with this piece, which I was working on. It was like a Susquehanna River stone and a fossilized sand dollar. And that was how I ended the video. And so someone sends this to me. So this is the piece which I was working on. And then if you go to Wikipedia and you type in Bastat, they show you this thing, which is like a you can see right here, it says Bastat wiki. You can't see the bottom, but this is in a museum, I guess you would call it like some sort of ode to her, and it looks just like it. It's the same sort, general size, same sort of coloring. So going back into, here it is, the finished product right there.
You like that? You like that symbol? The stone that I have from you has something just like that on that.
I do. Well. I always work with five.
Yeah.
Just, I like the 5, and I have it connected here. But yes, like we go and we see, like what struck me the most about what you shared on that book was this idea of synchronicity being the same as the Tao. I have a certain thing in my head of like how I comprehend the Tao, and I have a certain thing of synchronicity, and they're a little bit different. And so now it's going to force me to go and meditate on that a little bit. And then also like the idea that synchronicity is causality, whereas I've always thought of it more so as like past tense, like it's an indication of something, not necessarily of what's coming forward. So I find that very fascinating as well.
Which would be what they would want us to believe. They know it's a predictor. We think it's a reflector.
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly.
So I want to show one more thing too, what you just said about why 5 is important to you, right? Okay, so back to this symbol here. Like I've been going on and on and on about this 4-lobe shape, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's a 5th element in the middle. And when I was showing the thing with the function 1 sound system, and when I was talking with Chad Stumke, there's this point in the middle, which is where the 5th element is. That is where you penetrate through to a different reality. And if people remember the movie 5th Element, about that reality that was sort of in there, right? Remember that movie 5th Element? I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again. I saw parts of it when it was, but you know, this is a 4-lobe shape with like a little hole in the middle here, right? I have all this symbolism. I showed you those metal things that we have here, Michael, that my grandma had left here.
Yes.
We're finding stuff all over the house with that. And inside, so when you go inside the 4-lobe shape, you get this point thing. And in the middle of it, there's another 4-lobe shape, but with a little dot in the middle, like a 5th element, right? So like, you know, you see the 4 lobes obviously, but like the penetration point, like the marker is that dot in the middle. Like that's the 5th element. That's the ether. That's the pass through to the other side kind of thing, right? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, but I'm curious as to what that material is of that thing in Egypt, because it looks like we like some of this K2 and vanadium. It looks like some of those stones. This element vanadium keeps popping up on a number of threads that we're dealing with right now. That's quite interesting. And when we were looking at vanadium stones this morning, some of them look similar to what that was.
All right.
All righty, guys.
That's a good breaking point.
Good breaking point for those who are watching this on YouTube. If you would like to join us for the workshop next time, please contact me. Which email address am I using right now? Please contact me at emilycmoyer@protonmail.com, so you can join in on that. You can find Michael at susquehannaalchemy.com. You can find me here on YouTube at Emily Moyer, or at patreon.com/offplanetmedia, and come play with us. And we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into the workshop. We'll see you guys next time.
See ya.